Welcome to the Scaleup Valley podcast, where we bring the best founders, CEOs, and investors to help you scale a business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is Ian Myers, the CEO of Oceans. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here.
Awesome. So today we have a great story. So you have a VC background, and then you went more into loving and owning your destiny, loving bootstrapping modes, and you were able to build Oceans as a scalable services business. You are past 10 million in revenue, 40 people plus as your internal team, because then you also have teams working on your clients that we will explain a little bit later, the concept of Oceans and develop prop of Oceans. You also have here an interesting story and flavor about being a Buddhist monk in Asia, but let's start from the beginning. I was just teasing our audience for what they should expect from our conversation today. But yeah, let us know more about your story and how did you end up starting Oceans?
Yeah, it's, entirely unexpectedly is the answer. And I feel that every stage in my career has been in a completely different area and a completely different thing. And that's both terrifying and really excited. My background, coming out of school was in literature. I thought, oh man, I'm never going to get a job. So I need to try to pivot to something a bit adjacent. I can't make a good cup of coffee, so I'll never be a barista. So I ended up going to Stanford for grad school to study international policy. I was really interested in security policy, how countries around the world use soft power, hard power, military power, investment to essentially muscle their way in or out of various security positions around the world. And that just sort of led me to, I studied abroad in Japan. I studied Buddhism in Japan, speak Japanese. So I got connected to a Japanese bank that wanted to deploy capital into US venture funds. And they wanted a friendly American guy to sort of help them do that, who could also speak Japanese. And so I took on that task. And that was my sort of introduction to venture.
Wow.
Because I had been doing basically just literature and academia until then. It's hard to avoid at Stanford. We had the humanities campus is like 50-year-old buildings with stuff leaking from the ceiling and buckets on the floor. And then you walk, a little bit over to the engineering campus, and it's like a city of the future where there's robots and gleaming stuff and huge, beautiful buildings. So, I sort of was in the circle of startups and venture when I was there, but wasn't really interested in it. And it wasn't until I started investing in venture funds with no real experience, if I'm being honest, on behalf of this bank, that I really got exposure to, New York, Canada, London, California, how funds operate, what funds do, what startups do. And eventually was like, wait a minute, being an LP is kind of slow and boring. I want to be on the front lines. So I went to work for a venture fund, New York, doing mostly Series A deals in fintech, a little bit of consumer, some data stuff as well. Then I just felt also the same way I did when I was an LP, which is I'm just still so slow, and seeing the entrepreneurs move so quickly and tackle new things and take on new stuff. And I sort of wanted, then I wanted a piece of that. So I left the venture fund. Didn't realize how nice and cozy it is to be in venture, where you sort of got guaranteed revenue for 10 years, where there's only a few businesses where you can pull something like that off. But, so went to become the CEO of a startup in New York called NewsPicks. It was a media business that was eventually acquired. Went to work for a company in Asia after that, Japanese business called Usabase. They had a big office in Sri Lanka, sort of really got my exposure to global talent pools around that time. And when the pandemic hit, I saw the world changing in how people were able to set up their countries to be operated by anyone from anywhere, and launched Oceans.
We will get back to the pod in 1 minute. Let me just tell you that I'm glad to announce that this podcast is sponsored by the web agency WebTech. WebTech are specialists on getting customers to companies. They are booking 250 meetings a month to their own sales team. And their business strategy is to teach other companies what they do for themselves. I'm very excited to announce that I've agreed with Pontus, the CEO of WebTech, a special advantage to our listeners. Our community have now access to a pre-designed suggestion on how your website could be improved and or free trials for both SEO and digital marketing. Oh, and by the way, we are working with them too, and I'm impressed by the results. You can do the same. You just need to go to trywebtech.com/Mike, trywebtech.com/Mike, and tech is without the H, just TEC, and tell them you are a listener of the show. Now, back to the pod. Awesome. So, and Oceans is kind of 4 years old since the pandemic started?
No, actually, Ocean's only about 2 years old.
2 years old. Awesome.
Yeah.
So from 22 to 24, and
Yep.
you were able in 2 years to go from zero to 10 million plus as a services business. This was your first time leading a services business, given your
Yeah,
LP
before it was
venture
tech.
CEO
Yeah.
role. Yeah.
Before it was tech, it was an app previously, and I will say, if you're considering building an app, you should pause on that because it's like the most frustrating thing in the world to try to compete for eyeballs in the app store and downloads, and it's such a gamble. But yeah, so I did apps, and then I did briefly worked on a gaming company, but nothing really in this space. This was truly just an experience that I had that was really beneficial and worked really well for me that I wanted to take and give to others. And I think oftentimes that's the best founding story. If you look at companies where they've made an internal tool and then that actually becomes the product, or, like
Right.
Slack, where they had a messaging system in their game that became Slack,
Exactly.
things that you work really well for you, that you productize and share with others. That's what happened with Oceans. I have no
Awesome.
background in staffing or talent or anything like that.
That's really amazing. And so did you start Oceans alone or with any partner or co-founder?
I started Oceans basically by myself, but very quickly picked up two people that were sort of instrumental in getting it off the ground, and they became my co-founders, one of whom worked on really helping to develop our EA Plus product, which is our kind of founder-focused EA. That's really what has driven our popularity and driven our success. Right. And then another founder who came from a long background in services and sort of just knew how to build and scale services businesses, which was new to me, and has been just super helpful as Oceans has grown.
So that's really amazing. So as we were saying, now you are kind of 40 people, so 6 in North America, 33 in Sri Lanka, and 1 in South Africa. But the main kind of Sri Lanka value proposition started because of your experience in your previous company in Asia. So they had the office in Sri Lanka. And yeah, maybe let's go to the beginning again. Like we started your story. Let's go to Oceans. So what is Oceans about, man?
Yeah, Oceans was born out of an observation, which is that a lot of people were looking for talent in well-known areas. So if you talk to most entrepreneurs, they'll say, I'm hiring in Eastern Europe, I'm hiring in Latin America, I'm hiring in the Philippines, I'm hiring in India. These are sort of like the dedicated talent pools that people have pulled from over the past decade as more startups have gone to use global talent. I think part of the problem with that is each one of those markets has changed in the past decade. They've either gotten more expensive, they've gotten more crowded, they've gotten more stiffer competition in sourcing talent. And so recently you've seen a lot of people struggle in those markets to hire really skilled folks at a really good price point. When I got to Sri Lanka, I saw an incredibly well-educated population, people who were very well professionalized. And I realized that there's a top percentile of talent in markets around the world That's just like the US. They go to the best universities, they work at the best companies. They're not on Fiverr, Upwork, they're not available as talent to just recruit as a contractor. And how do you get that talent to work for companies in the US that need it? That was the idea behind Oceans. And so the concept was pretty simple. If we build a business in Sri Lanka, we hire the people, we give them all the benefits they need, we give them, health insurance, we give them events, we give them the whole package that they need to be successful professionals.
Right.
And also, most importantly, a safety net. When you're dealing with very conservative cultures, they're concerned about, hey, what happens if, I go work for a startup and they shut down? Well, in our case, you just get rematched to a new one. You don't miss a paycheck. So we do all that, but then we match them out full-time, long-term, 40 hours a week to our clients, who are mostly startups, agencies, small businesses who need help in admin or operations, marketing, or finance. Those are kind of the categories that we work in. People come to us, they're looking for an EA, they're looking for a bookkeeper, they're looking for FP&A, they're looking for a growth marketer, and they don't have the capacity to spend that much, but they still need a really highly skilled person. That's where we help, and that's really our value proposition, is a much higher skill talent pool at a price point that's equivalent to other places. And that's done really well for us. We've grown entirely through just referrals from existing customers and shout outs and things like that.
Right. And in terms of the team that you have dedicated to your clients, what is kind of the size that you are able now to? What is the
Over
size of the
300.
team? Oh, that's a lot. So yeah, we were just discussing before we started the podcast about the size of the team, and we just stopped at the internal team of 40,
Right.
but
Yeah.
but 300, yes, I imagine that having all those people in the payroll makes the operation much more complex, right? So
Yep.
and kind of, so why don't those companies, your clients in the US, can't hire directly from Sri Lanka? Because you have a better understanding of the market, because you need to follow a certain level of regulation that is difficult for American companies to follow. So why they need to go through oceans, right? Yeah.
There's a couple of root causes. Primarily, the first is you can break it up into sort of the two sides of hiring, which are sourcing and retention. So on the sourcing side, it's very difficult to understand and interpret who's going to be good in any market. Right. And so you'll take a lot of swings, a lot of misses, and you'll end up burning a lot of time and energy. We do all that for you. More importantly, you can reach out to folks on LinkedIn, you can reach out to folks wherever, but they're not going to take you up on it if you're not a local business or you don't have credibility in the market. It's a very conservative market, and people are concerned with job security. They're concerned with paychecks. They're concerned with all their benefits. And it doesn't make sense for you as a person hiring a single individual to go in and set up all that stuff and all the benefits and everything for your person. And so that's sort of on the sourcing side. And also, we have, some clients with 15 people from us. So if you want more, we sort of act as the manager of that. We do all that. We're sort of the managed service provider for you. So you don't have to, you can just say, hey, I want another growth marketer. Hey, I want another EA, and we'll take care of everything. Right. The retention side is also very important, because the average, span of a contractor is really, really short. An international contractor, because it sucks to sit alone in your living room. It sucks to not be able to go to events. It sucks to be just sitting at home on your laptop, isolated from your team and everything. We really put a lot of effort into doing parties, events, upskilling, wellness programming, town halls. We do get-togethers. We do book clubs. Nice. People can feel like they're part of a company, and they have peers and they have colleagues, and it makes them want to stay. And we also handle their career progression, their HR, their raises, their compensation, all this stuff that can be really frustrating. We handle all of that on the retention side to make sure that people stick around for the long term. Our oldest client, 2 years old, has 5 people from us. They're all still there.
It's incredible.
So, it's great to see that. And that's the type of relationship that we try to develop with our clients.
It's really, really great. Okay, cool. And in terms of you know, what have been some of the lessons learned since in the last 2 years to build such an organization from 0 to 10 million? So what have been the main building blocks to build a business and the main pains and inflection points that you faced? So I know it's a very big question, right? So, but just
That
highlight
that
some
that
of
is a
them.
good
Yeah.
question. And what I will say is I think it's really different to build a business like this than it is to build a venture back company.
Mhm.
Um, when you get a bunch of money in your bank account and then you're just watching it go down, it's not a great feeling, but it's also comfortable. It's like, oh, I've got $10 million. Like, what could I possibly do to endanger the financial health of my business? Well, I guess a lot of companies have thrown away $10 million pretty easily, but
Yes, it is
it's
possible.
very, yeah, I guess it's very possible, but it's comforting. This was an exercise in really, watching the bank account, constantly making sure we were just funding ourselves and using cash flow to grow, which means you can't just hire up a big fancy executive team once you hit $1 million in ARR to accelerate
Exactly.
growth because you don't have the budget for it. Um, you have to really pay attention to when you're doing things. You have to really pay attention to when customers are paying you, when you're paying vendors, managing cash flow. We're at a point now where that's less important. We've been able to build a strong bank account. We've got good profits. It's great, but in the beginning, it's really on the razor's edge, and that was a very different experience.
Right.
Um, the flip side of that, and what I was accused of by a lot of my advisors, was being too unwilling to spend because you're overly concerned about investment and hiring because you're so focused on profit. So you can go the wrong way on that too, and I definitely did. There was a period where our existing team was holding up way too much. We were doing way too much with too few people. Everybody was burnt out because I was really focused on, do we really need to hire another person? Do we really need to add more headcount? Do we really need to increase our burn?
Right.
And you sort of get obsessed with the profit, which, to be honest, that's what businesses should do. You should absolutely be obsessing over profit every single month. That's something that I think has gotten lost in the past decade, 2 decades. But that was also very different, as I didn't expect to feel so strongly about spending money because we were working on a profit basis and not oh yeah, there's 10 million in the bank. Let's 6,000 for this SaaS tool this year. We'll see if it works. Um, so sorting all that out and making sure you're hiring at the right time was really difficult. And the last thing I will say is I didn't expect this level of growth. I didn't expect this level of success. And I certainly didn't expect this level of interest from people in profitable bootstrapped businesses. I've had so many entrepreneurs come to me that had either failed a venture-backed startup or had some success or had worked at a venture-backed startup, and they were like, I just want to build my own company that makes money, and
Right.
that's what I want to talk about. It's on the internet, it's on the podcast. We sort of started right at the time. We were a little bit ahead of the curve on that, and now it's sort of become a thing that everyone wants to do. So I didn't also expect that aspect of it where I have to talk to people about it a lot. So I have a
Yeah,
minimal Twitter following.
absolutely. Sounds amazing. And in terms of the business model, Ian, can you share a bit more with the audience? So how does pricing work? How do you make
Yeah.
money? So yeah.
Yeah.
This
So
is kind
we,
of much more a kind of a VC backed kind of question, but
yeah,
should
no,
also
it's
be
great.
asked to a profitable businessman. So
No, it's great, and I think it's important to understand how we work. And our goal is basically the reason our clients work with us. The reason we've grown so quickly is because you can hire somebody who is 90% to 100% as good as you would hire in the US for 80% less. So on
it's
average, our
incredible.
roles cost between $3,000 and $4,000 a month for a full-time person. Um, it depends on what role you're hiring for. Obviously, something like finance is going to cost more than an EA. Um, we basically charge that flat fee, and then included in that is all of our costs that cover all the person's everything, and then our margin is baked into that as well. But you don't have to worry about anything other than just paying our invoice. And so that's the
Right.
model. It's really interesting. A lot of people talk to me and they're like, well, what about this? Like, what if you added on this? Or what if you like tacked on this service? What if you built some technology around this to let people, have a portal to talk to? And I'm like, why? It's just,
Yeah.
it's going really well. It's working. Like, it's so simple that, but it's clear product market fit. I don't need to build a big portal that's going to cost me $2 million to construct just so I have some technology multiple down the road.
Right.
So yeah, that's the business model. Very simple, pretty straightforward services.
Yeah.
The books are very not too many lines deep. It's very easy.
Yeah. And the other question that was popping my mind, and I think that the audience would also be thinking about it, is at a certain point, maybe Sri Lanka will face the same issue that you were talking about, Eastern Europe, Latam, India being also very competitive markets. So how do you plan to move forward? Do you think there are other markets like South Africa or that you believe that you need to tap in order to sustain your competitive advantage?
Well, from a business standpoint, it is as if the question is about how I can continue to grow the business, I think there's a tipping point at which scale outweighs margin. So you get to a certain place where you're big enough in the market that even if you reduce your margins, you're still a massive business. And because the returns are being generated basically just for me, I don't need to IPO. I don't need to sell. We make money every month. I'm not too concerned about how I'm going to maintain a super strong competitive advantage until I get to IPO. We'll grow the business. We'll get to a certain scale. We will absolutely, and already are exploring other talent pools. But it's not only a question of shifting talent and shifting how your business is structured. It's also a question of shifting customers. I think the natural evolution for us is to go from working mostly with startups, which I think most startups are aware that they're annoying and change their minds every day, and they pivot constantly, and they have tons of money, and then they have no money, and then it's
yes.
The benefit to startups is they move quick, great customers, early customers.
Yes.
That's why everyone works with them when they're launching something. But down the line, you start to prefer the small businesses that have steady, capital. They're cash flowing. They have low expectations.
Right.
You also, for us, we're beginning to move into a bit of a more mid-market. So working bigger contracts with more companies that are pretty established in the, $50 to $200 million revenue range is a natural evolution over time that will hopefully allow us
to
200 million. So
200 million. Yeah.
Moving the customer base from early stage startups to established companies who really want a partner in large chunks of global talent. That's a key strategy in continuing to grow.
Got it. And this would be kind of the upcoming question is, so you have scaled from 0 to 10 million in 2 years. Congratulations. I didn't say it, but that's pretty impressive. And of course to your co-founders as well and to your team. But yeah, what's the plan for you is to, keep building, scaling a profitable business. You introduced a concept that is very interesting, that you can even sacrifice a bit the margin to get to the next stage. But what is the big plan? So how do you see yourself? What would you consider success? Just run the company and have fun with the company and do the best possible, or do you still think in the not in the VC bucket playbook, but with the ambition of the VC bucket kind of game? I think that we got a bit obsessed about it, that sometimes it's difficult to turn off the ship, right? So even when we go to services business, we still come with that mindset. Okay, how can we make this big, even if it is not very tech savvy and very sophisticated from a capital perspective, from a profitability perspective, it is, and bootstrapping philosophy. That's great.
Yeah, it definitely like they're not mutually exclusive. There's plenty of big non VC backed companies, and
Absolutely, yes.
there are also plenty of technology companies that are not VC backed that grow faster than us and probably will get bigger than us. There is a certain inherent difficulty in the staffing business to get to a certain. There's very few, in the same way that there's very few accounting firms that are like multi-billion-dollar accounting firms. There's very few
Right,
staffing firms that are multi-billion-dollar staffing firms. It's
right.
just difficult. It's really difficult to achieve services at that scale sustainably. The important part is, I think, for the listeners, is they're thinking about their own businesses and, should I raise money? Should I not raise money? The
Yes.
important thing is I can just decide.
Yeah.
Our board is me. And
Yeah.
if I get to a point as an entrepreneur in a year where I really feel like, okay, I think we're cruising, maybe we want to sell the business, and I want to go on to my next venture, I can. If I want to keep going, keep taking profits out of the business, run it sustainably while it's growing, I can do that too.
Mhm.
We are able to decide what we want to do responsively based on our own market conditions and our own business year to year, instead of being driven towards something that may or may not make sense for us. And I think
Mhm.
that is, when I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, so many of them come to me and say, I had a great idea and it would have been a great business for me personally if I just built it without venture money, because then I wouldn't have been pushed towards a much bigger outcome than was possible with my business.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. But you were talking about your potential avenues of growth. You're talking about the upmarket movement of having more the mid-sized business from 50 to 200 million in revenue, more established companies. So now your main ICP is much more startups, agencies, small businesses. So companies, as you said, they are at 1 million in revenue. They can't afford a leadership team, but they still need a leadership team at that size because they need to have someone in marketing, someone in sales, someone in delivery, someone in finance, someone in
Right.
people. And if they don't have it, it's the founder, CEO who is playing all those
It
roles,
does
or an
everything.
operations kind of person who is trying to play multiple roles at the same time.
Yeah, and we see this a lot. I mean, to give a really concrete example of where we plug in very well, we have a
Mhm.
lot of companies, seed stage startups as
Mhm.
clients. And the reason for that is, we're not talking pre-seed, we have some pre-seed, but when you raise a seed round, so historically that's anything from 750K to 3 million, though I think there were some like $50 million seed rounds in the hype days of
Right.
yesteryear.
Outliers.
um,
Yeah.
but you've got let's call it 1 to 3 million in funding. Now you've got that funding because you have a product that works. You're not going to get to the A without real revenue metrics being achieved.
Yeah.
You don't have enough money to hire a bunch of people, but you need a bunch of people to achieve those revenue
To achieve
metrics.
the chicken and
It's a
egg. Yeah.
real conundrum, and a lot of companies die in that valley because they try to work with consultants, and that's not helpful because they're not fully dedicated. They're not working
Yeah.
fully for the company. They try to do too much themselves because they don't have the cash to hire a bunch of other people, or they hire a bunch of other people, it doesn't work out, they burn through all their money, they don't hit their targets. We work really well with companies at that stage because they can get full-time team members who are dedicated to getting them to those milestones for such a fraction of the cost that it's incredibly helpful to going from where they were when they raised the seed to where they need to be at the Series A, and then continuing on to the Series B. It's the same thing.
Yeah. And in terms of, we were thinking about the first avenue growth that you explained. So the second avenue growth would be kind of expanding talent pools, or do you feel that at this stage you don't need a new talent pool? You can still grow a lot in Sri Lanka, so you can still execute your upmarket strategy without leaving Sri Lanka?
We're definitely dedicated to staying in Sri Lanka, and there's plenty of room to go there. We hire 35 people a month currently.
Well,
We're always looking at other markets, testing out of other markets, but that's really just to meet our demand. It's not really a growth driver for us or a revenue diversification for us. So I
mhm.
think bigger companies is one. The other avenue is additional services. So we can
Right.
build, we have hundreds of clients. We have a great relationship with
The
them.
customer base, the trust,
What do you
the
do with those
assets. Yeah.
relationships? There's
Yeah.
other services you can offer. I've been hesitant to take my eye off the ball that's currently going really quickly and getting ahead of me.
Yes. The
But
focus.
once we stabilize year 4, year 5, things are great. The company's all solidified. Then maybe we start to pay attention to some of these other services we can offer. And I think that's another growth strategy as well.
Sounds very good. And could you give any example about what could be some hypothesis of what could be those other services? Did you have any thoughts
Well,
about it?
for instance, we have a sister company started by one of my co-founders in Oceans called Over Easy, and they do design services,
Okay,
um,
makes
both
sense.
full branding and then also subscription. Design is really hard. Design is really hard to hire overseas. Design is really difficult to keep. It's also very difficult to be predictable unless you're at a certain size. You don't like a full-time designer. You don't know when you're going to have the work. You don't know when you're not going to have the work. So people often use agencies. But Oceans essentially provides the rails. Over Easy is the delivery mechanism, and we just started this business, but we have clients already who are using it for design services, branding services, things like that. So we get a lot of people that come into us looking for talent, and they also ask about, hey, I love your brand. Who did it? And it's like, oh, well, here you go. And
Right,
then now you have other revenue streams in the family.
absolutely. So time is flying, but I still wanted to kind of, give some pointers to our audience on how to scale a services business. So what do you think were some of the secrets of being able to scale Oceans so quickly again to 10 million plus in 2 years? And you said 340 people, being 40 people in the internal team, which is also quite a challenge for the ones who have been here. This is hyper growth,
Yeah.
so it's really, really tough. In theory, it's just numbers that we put in a spreadsheet, but
Right.
they're all people, and there is a culture, there is processes. So there is a lot of stuff to be able to achieve this kind of growth. Do you think it was, again, as you said, that you have kind of two co-founders, one of them also with experiences scaling businesses? Um, yeah, or you were also talking about something interesting, which was, you know, you really faced problem solution fit very quickly and then product market fit very quickly. So, and when you definitely have a huge pain, a very specific ICP that sees that pain, and you have a good package, a good product, a good value proposition, a good pricing, then the product almost sells itself. So then it's about execution. So because you don't need to almost generate demand because then word of mouth starts happening because it's such a very shared pain that you also have peers as entrepreneurs. You will say, I'm working with Oceans and I'm hiring
Right.
people in Sri Lanka. Oh, tell me more about it. I've never heard about it. Maybe I need to do the same. Let's try
Yeah.
it. Okay, I will
That's how,
introduce.
exactly how
Yeah.
it happened.
Okay.
It's exactly how it happened. Our challenges have always been too much demand to handle, which is a blessing in a
The
lot of ways.
opposite,
Nobody's going to
yeah,
give you,
of
no
the
one's going to give you
typical,
sympathy that
yeah,
you're overworked and underslept because you have too much demand.
yes.
Um,
Those are
so
the luxury problems.
the luxury problems, exactly. And the solution, to scaling, I think, is really identifying when you hire the right people, you should see you should see a bump up. So
Right.
if you bring someone in to work for you and they're a key hire, that point in time, you should be able to look back on the growth graph of your business and say, it was like this, and then I made a hire, and then it was like this. Really paying attention to key hires was really important to me, but also in a way that emphasized just talent and experience and not big fancy executive hires. I think I really, really focused on who's going to execute and not who's come in from being a manager and is going to, just sort of flounder around in a business that's growing and executing fast. That's a mistake I see a lot of entrepreneurs make. They're like, oh, well, I just hired the head of blank blank from Stripe. And it's like, they are not going to do what you think they're going to do. They're going to want to hire 20 people and they're going to sit on top of it versus who's going to come in and build the sheets, get into Google Drive, make sure the formulas are working, make sure the predictions are working, the scenario planning is done. It's a very different profile. So that was a big part of it. But honestly, you know, luck and timing and product market fit are such a huge force of momentum
Yeah.
that that's 80% of it.
I really love it because we have nowadays so much content about go to market, about generating demands, about outbound, inbound, all of that stuff. But sometimes it just shows that you don't have problem solution fit and product market fit and the really big market and the really big pain. So you are much more a vitamin than a painkiller. So then you are just kind of artificially trying to justify your idea. Of course, there is something there. If not, you are not able even to get to seed, Series A, or talking about non-VC backed companies to go from 1 to 5 or 0 to 1 to 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20. So you just don't get there. But yeah, so I think that it's important to emphasize this, right? So it's really, really important to work on a problem that doesn't need to be fancy, but needs to be a huge pain that customers are willing to pay to be solved, right? So and then make money by by solving that pain.
Yeah, and there's valleys at every stage of the journey, and I think for entrepreneurs, they're very frightening. For VC backed entrepreneurs, typically you're raising a lot of money and you can work for a year, 2 years, 3 years before you go into market. And then you get into market, and that's when it's like, do people even want this? You can feel safe during the building phase because there's no test.
Right.
For us, and for services business in particular,
That's the beauty. Yeah.
The question mark becomes, okay, I'm outside of my circle of friends. It's typically very easy to sell services to your friends, to the people you know, which is like, hey, I'm opening up a design shop. I've got plenty of friends who will use my services because we're friends. Oh, okay, now all my friends are clients. Am I going to be able to get people who don't know me to use my services? And that's the valley you have to cross as a services business. That's the point of anxiety that shows you that you're real, that you've solved a problem, is like, we're being chosen not because I'm your friend, but because we have a real product and a real service that's delivering a ton of value. That's the anxiety point for us. We crossed that point, but it was very nerve-wracking when I realized I had already asked all my friends to become our customers.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go to the last segment of the show, where I quickly ask a quick question and you provide me your insights with a swift reply. So if you would have the opportunity to have a coffee with yourself 2 years ago when you were starting Oceans, what advice would you offer to your younger self?
Try not to regret decisions you've made so much, because a lot of people now are, like young people especially, look at their LinkedIn, look at their career planning. They think they should be on some sort of path. And even if you make the wrong decision at one point in your life, it could lead to a better outcome that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't made a wrong decision. And so I always would tell my younger self, I tell other people, don't be so down because you think you're not where you should be. You're not doing what you should be doing. You never know where you're going to end up and where your path is going to take you. And you might make 4 wrong turns and end up somewhere you would have never thought you would be. And that was my journey as well.
Awesome. What are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
I feel that I am able to lead the business in a way that I was not able to previous companies. I see myself not making the same mistakes I made before, and I'm proud of that growth. I was 26 when I first became a CEO. I was not prepared. I made a lot of mistakes. I really screwed up a lot of things. And I see that I am remembering those things, doing better, and really growing. And that is something I'm really proud of.
That's
personally.
awesome. We share that one, and that's why one of the reasons I do what I do while leading my agency or my boutique advisory firm. So, worst advice ever received?
I think the worst advice I ever received was to kind of constantly be listening to your audience and iterating based on what your audience says or what your buyers say. That's something I think a lot of people say. And I think when you're building a company, that's a recipe for disaster because it forces you to constantly be second guessing your decisions. And to me, at least, it's more important for you to believe in your own vision and what you want a product to be and to just build that than to be constantly listening to clients tell you add this feature, subtract this feature, put this over here. You end up in this sort of like endless circle of not knowing what your
Right.
product needs to have. So you should listen to your conviction, not your customer's conviction. That's really contrarian advice, but
Yeah,
ultimately I think it creates
I
stronger
love it.
companies if they have actual product market fit. Obviously that doesn't work if you don't.
If you don't,
Yeah.
exactly. Then that's why you need to go talk to customers and maybe present anything else to customers because
Yeah,
that
then
will
it's a
be
pivot situation, and that's when you should
exactly.
listen to your customers.
Exactly. I agree, but I get what you mean. It's kind of the old Steve Jobs quote, right? So if you ask, or yeah, I think I don't know if it was Henry Ford. If you ask it, yes, what was Henry Ford? If you ask to customers what they want, they will tell you that they want faster horses. They will
Yeah,
not tell you that they want a car,
right,
right?
right.
So only after you put a car in front of the customer, that's when oh, this is much better than horses.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
for the reason horses are amazing, but for transportation purpose, this is better than a horse.
yeah.
Uh, favorite Your favorite book? Now let's get into resources.
I'm gonna not give a fun answer for this because I'm a literature major, so I don't read a lot of business. I've never read a business book in my life. I don't really read any business books. I don't. I basically just read fiction or historical nonfiction.
Yeah.
So my favorite historical nonfiction is called *The Splendid and the Vile*. It's about the Churchill family during the first year of World War II. Incredible
Wow.
book. My favorite fiction book is called Winesburg, Ohio by Sherwood Anderson, which is a piece of classic American literature.
Wow. That is amazing. Favorite movie or series?
I'm a huge sci-fi nerd. My favorite series is Stargate, which is a kind of campy 90s, early 2000s sci-fi show.
Awesome. And finally, your favorite podcasts, excluding this one.
Yes, excluding this one, I've
Yeah.
got another weird answer for that. It's a podcast called the Indiana Jones Minute. Uh, Being a big
Wow.
nerd, I like
That is
Indiana
the first
Jones.
one. Wow.
Yeah, I don't. I also don't really listen to a lot of business podcasts either.
Yes.
I just keep my blinders on and focus on what I'm doing. Indiana Jones Minute, huge shout out to those guys. Basically, what they do is they watch 1 minute of every Indiana Jones movie and make a single podcast episode about that minute. So they're 20-minute episodes discussing 1 minute of the film, and it sounds crazy and insane and boring, but they have great guests. They're great guys. It's a really fun podcast, and the total break from your typical kind of like two people talking about whatever subject matter.
Awesome. This is super cool, Ian. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show, and congrats for what you have built in the last 2 years and also for your journey so far. So we are looking forward to have more services business being scaled and more bootstrap businesses and more profit-oriented business, of course, with great purposes behind it. So I think it should be also very fulfilling to see the impact you have in both in Sri Lanka in terms of the talent, but also on your clients that are can't afford the talent that they need to be able to change lives, and at the same time also change their own
Yeah.
lives by changing the lives of others. So that's really something that I love. Also, as being a diverse company as well. So Ian, thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And to our community, thanks for being there. We keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier as you scale up your company. See you soon and keep scaling.